Really quite remarkable. Saturday's a similar kind of day, although as the winds ease, it may turn a bit more misty and murky, and temperatures perhaps not quite as high, but it's staying very mild.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
A very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. Thank you for your company on this, my first week on this new show. We got 2 packed hours ahead of lively debates with 3 great guests today. I'm joined by William Atkinson of Conservative Home and 2 newcomers to GB News. I am delighted to say the novelist and comedian Kathy Lett is here, author of 20 books, no less, and also broadcaster and world record holding auctioneer, no less. We'll find out a little bit more about that, Johnny Gould. Now, are you a train driver, a nurse or a postal worker set to strike? If so, why now? Today, we're asking if it's selfish to be taking such action when the public purse is empty. Home Secretary Suella Braverman says that the police should spend less time on Twitter and more effort on common sense policing. So is she right? Are the police out of touch? Are they doing their job? Let me know your stories. gbviews@gbnews.uk. And we've been talking about it all week, but Matt Hancock finally entered the jungle last night in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Is it fair that he's abandoned his constituents, or does he have any sort of positive impact on how people might view politicians? Let me know what you think, and I'll tell you exactly what I think as well. GBViews at gbnews.uk. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news.
Good morning, it's 3 minutes past 10. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak will meet with the leaders of the devolved nations and Irish Premier today for the first time since becoming Prime Minister. He's expected to urge the nations to work together and build a future defined not by division but by unity. Mr Sunak will meet his Irish counterpart Michael Martin and First Ministers Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford at the British-Irish Council Summit in Blackpool. The absence of a power-sharing executive means Northern Ireland won't be represented by any politicians at the talks. Mr Sunak's the first Prime Minister to attend the summit in over a decade. Well, Shadow Secretary for Northern Ireland Peter Carl says change is needed.
There's got to be a change of attitude. There's got to be more emphasis on Northern Ireland, and the interests of Northern Ireland have got to be put first, not as it has been for years now, neglected and used as a tool to beat a political tool to beat the EU with or other issues.
President Joe Biden says it was a good day for democracy and America after voters cast their final ballots in the US midterm elections yesterday. The White House shared video of the president last night congratulating many Democrats who'd won hard-fought races. Control of the Senate still hangs in the balance, but Republicans look set to take the House of Representatives. The results, though, have defied expectations, with many experts predicting a red wave of Republican victories. America's top general estimates more than 100,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the start of the war in Ukraine. General Mark Milley estimates Kyiv may well have suffered a similar number of casualties. He puts the figure of civilians killed in the war so far at around 40,000. The Kremlin yesterday announced the withdrawal of Russian forces from the strategically important southern city of Kherson. President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned against complacency.
There is a lot of joy in the information space today, and it is clear why. But our emotions must be reserved, always during the war. But you need to understand, no one just goes away if he does not feel the pressure of power. The enemy does not give us gifts, does not make gestures of goodwill. We fight for it all.
The Royal College of Nursing is urging the government to take action over pay or face disruption across the country. The union's announced its first national strike in its history, with 300,000 members voting in favour of walkouts. It's expected to impact the majority of NHS employers, although emergency care won't be affected. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland says nurses were recognised for their work during the pandemic with a 3% pay rise last year.
But the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, who quote, want 17%. Now, that is a high ask given the economic times that we are in. And so I actually generally think all these things can be solved by dialogue, and it's really important that dialogue continues because no one wants to see a strike. I'm absolutely sure of that.
The former Chancellor Philip Hammond has told GB News he supports a windfall tax for oil and gas companies. In an exclusive interview with Gloria De Piero, he said he'd be surprised if the current Chancellor fails to extend the windfall tax. Jeremy Hunt announces his autumn statement next Thursday. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak previously announced the tax when he was Chancellor, describing it as a 25% energy profits levy. Lord Hammond said the government will need to raise more tax revenue if it wants to maintain the same level of public service.
Happens, I am broadly in favour of a windfall tax, so long as it's sensibly structured and only tackles the genuinely windfall element, not the cyclical ups and downs that you get in energy markets, because energy companies plan around those cycles of lower profits and higher profits over different periods of years. But where genuine windfalls are earned, I think it is legitimate to tax them.
And you can watch that interview with Lord Hammond speaking to Gloria De Piero in full here on GB News tomorrow at 3:30. Eco-activists blocked the M25 in multiple locations for the fourth day in a row this morning. 2 arrests have been made so far after Just Stop Oil protesters climbed gantries at junctions along the motorway in Essex and Surrey. One lane had been closed for a while earlier, but all lanes between junction 28 and 29 are now open. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Bev.
Hello, thank you for joining us. This is Bev Turner today on GB News, and it is still weird talking about myself in the third person on day 4. Now, this morning, I am pleased to be joined by William Atkinson, Assistant Editor of Conservative Home, straight out of university. We're going to get a bit of gossip on what that was like in the last few years. Johnny Gould, broadcaster and journalist, is also here with us. New face to GB News. Thank you so much, Johnny. And Kathy Lett. She needs no introduction whatsoever, lived in this country for several years, celebrated author of more than 20 books. Now, I want to hear from you as well. You are our 5th voice in the show. Get in touch as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Before we go into all that, I feel like I need to get to know you guys, especially as you are new to the GB News audience as well. Johnny, who are you? How'd you get here? Who let you in?
I'm amazed I'm here. As the former presenter of Channel 5 Baseball Wednesday and Sunday night, midnight through till 5, you know, to actually be in a TV studio where people are awake, let alone watching, is an absolute joy.
Now, you were a Brexiteer, so politically you're on board with this channel and where we came from.
I voted Brexit. I'm deeply saddened that it's caused such divisions within our society, let alone within my own friendship groups. I mean, the vast majority of my friends voted Remain, and obviously I wasn't particularly popular. I don't regret my decision. I would make the same decision again. But I just think it's incredibly sad that we can't have debate on all issues, whether they be political, social, financial, and lose friendships.
You've come to the right place, Johnny Gould. You see, that's why I knew you would be here. You would be great being here. Kathy, you've lived here for how long now?
About 33 years now,
You feel like an honorary Brit.
I'm practically a POM. My lips have lost weight, the amount of vowel rounding. So, yes.
And you consider yourself to sit politically left?
Oh, yeah, totally. I'm tribally Labour, I would say.
Good. You see, we need more people like this on this channel because that's how we get the debates going that Johnny's talking about. A lot of people on the left are too scared to come on GB News.
Why? Everyone's so far so lovely. There's no blood on the shag pile yet. I mean, let's wait and see.
Yeah.
I might have to go to the vets and get my claws done.
2 hours
you know.
to go.
It's early days. And William, straight out of uni, where you were studying...
history.
At Oxford.
Yeah, the subject of champions. Yes, no, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a fabulous subject that I should suggest anybody watching who wants to pursue a career as a historian should do so. I don't think I was quite talented enough, so hence why I'm footling around in journalism.
And you bring the youngster's perspective to this show. I'm so happy that I'm so happy you're out of bed at this time of the day, to be completely honest. Now, right, first of all, first topic, how selfish are striking workers? Nurses have voted to strike in a dispute over pay, the first UK-wide industrial action ever carried out by the Royal College of Nursing. Despite assurances that the strikes won't affect emergency care, there are huge concerns about the impact this could have on the NHS this winter. Nurses are asking for a pay rise of 5% above inflation. We've also got strikes looming in the postal sector, in our universities. We were all... Basically, we did well to get here today because the train strike that is happening today. William, let me start with you. Why now, do you think? What is in the air? Is it just about paying conditions or is there something else going on?
Well, to be slightly nerdy about it, I would say the fundamental thing that has changed compared to previous years is the level of inflation. With inflation running at 10%, obviously, whereas pay deals are, I think, expected at the moment to run at 4 to 5%, people are seeing real terms cuts to their pay, and that is an obvious incentive to strike. Nevertheless, I think also we've had several years of pent-up frustration on these sort of issues, not only because inflation has been so low, but with everything from COVID to Brexit, etc. I think we're so used to an ongoing period of political chaos that I think the unions are more than happy to join into that as well. Nevertheless, I would say that the fundamental roots of this are economic, and I think it is a selfish act to strike. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's saying that I want to put services at risk because I believe that my pay conditions simply aren't good enough. And now, while I would perhaps disagree with some of their tactics and their choice to do it on the verge of the winter Gotterdammerung we're going to see within the NHS, nevertheless, I entirely understand their reasons for doing so.
Do you think something has shifted, though, Cathy, in the last few years? We've seen the biggest transfer of wealth in history during COVID. There have been more billionaires created in the last 2 years than any other time. Is that playing on people's minds when they turn up at work?
Yes, totally. I mean, the gulf between the rich and the poor has never been so big. As you say, there are more billionaires than ever.
Yeah.
So, of course, working people have had enough of that. And especially the nurses. I think nurses should be paid more than politicians. I mean, where would we be without our nurses? Especially during COVID.
Yeah.
How heroic. They put their lives on the line. You can never pay them enough.
Yeah.
So, yes, and so what if people are striking? Unions have done everything for us. If we didn't have unions, we'd probably still be serfs. Well, you'd love that, surf's up, you know. But for the rest of us, yes, I'm totally behind people striking to get a better quality of life. And the rail strikes, for example. Why don't they just pay the rail bosses less and the drivers more?
But is that not to underestimate, Cathy, the inconvenience to the general public? Does striking work or do we lose the support?
Well, it's interesting when the research they're doing, it shows that the public are not against the strikes. They're frustrated, but they're not sort of raging against the strikers. They understand that the cost of living crisis is getting out of control. And we want to close that gap between the rich and the poor.
So, Johnny, if we take, say, the transport strikes, like Cathy said, all of the research shows predominantly the public, even though we might be frustrated, you know what we do now? We work from home. And so it isn't having the impact, is it? That
The irony here is that the strikes that were announced and then called off, I think, have annoyed people more than the strikes that actually went ahead, because you can make plans. You accept that striking is a part of a democracy, and we would never want that to disappear. The right to strike is an absolute pillar of democracy, and there's no question there. And we're talking about the nurses specifically. I have to put my hand up here and say that my dad was a doctor, spent 35 years in public health. My mum was a medical secretary. She worked on both sides of the fence, public health and private. My grandma was a nurse during the Second World War. My aunt was a nurse her whole career. So the NHS is very much a part of my life and my DNA.
Yeah.
But my dad, on his deathbed, said to me that it's a busted flush. And the real sadness for my family is that it's almost impossible to have a discussion about the NHS without everybody bearing down on you that you're a Tory right-wing scumbag because you want to change this beautiful organisation, and we should be proud of it, but it cannot continue to exist in its present form. And it frustrates the hell out of me when I see the job that nurses, that all frontline workers in the NHS do, and the bravery that you mentioned. But Cathy, you can expand that story. You've got the police, they put their lives at risk. You've got members of the armed forces, the fire brigade. There are many people in this country who put their life at risk every day they go to work. But the real frustration for me is when you hear about the amount the NHS invests in educating and training nurses and doctors who then a few years later leave for a better pay elsewhere. So we have to get in these staff nurses that are far more expensive. That financial madness, I just don't understand why that system is allowed to exist.
Go on, William.
Well, I think also an important aspect of that, as you say, is that the NHS is an incredibly inefficient monolith. I think it's still the world's largest purchaser of fax machines. Even in 2022.
Is that right?
But one of the major problems, of course, with paying nurses more when NHS budgets are as constrained as they are, even though they are going up by large amounts each year, is that you have to take money from elsewhere in the health service. This is exactly the problem they've got in Scotland at the moment. The SNP has cut the budget of the Scottish NHS, basically so that it can pay striking workers more in order to give in to union pay demands. And I think one interesting thing we see about the nurses' strikes, that I think it's only around half of nurses in England have voted to strike, whereas I think overwhelmingly they've done so in Wales and Scotland. And I think, frankly, the SNP and the Labour government in Wales are softer touches than the Tories in England, and have been much quicker to give in to previous pay demands. And therefore, as you had in the 1970s, you have a spiral of industrial action when unions know that they can get a pay rise, they therefore strike more. So one of the things we have to avoid not only is spiralling inflation, but Also a sort of spiraling sense that if unions can get away with something, they'll keep coming back for more. And so this industrial action will go from being something that in recent history has been quite atypical to something that becomes routine, and that would be very unfortunate for the country as a whole, but also would be very damaging to the unions' cases themselves.
Mind you, if everybody now cycles and walks more because they can't get the train, that will help the NHS anyway. So it might just all work out very nicely. Thank you.
You've been getting in touch with Your Views. Dave has said the unions try to make out that the strikes are about safety and working conditions, etc., yet it's these issues always seem to suddenly vanish once a pay rise is given. That's possibly a little harsh, Dave. Mike has said, here's an idea. What about giving nurses something tangible? Let them park free of charge at the hospitals.
Yeah.
100%.
100%. Yeah. Crazy.
Reduce their debt. But you see, we're not allowed to use our cars. You know, the motorist is living on borrowed time, aren't we? They're never going to support people sitting in their cars. Reduce their debt for medical education for starters. This would give them instant benefits with less burden to the taxpayer. And Wendy has said, it makes me so annoyed that nursing profession feel that they're entitled to such an unreasonable pay rise. There are so many people who worked and sacrificed throughout the pandemic. People, including myself, lost their businesses and are now struggling. What they are asking for is obscene, and they should be grateful that they have a decent livelihood. Well, that's every side of that debate.
Well, what is the definition of a decent livelihood?
Yeah.
Because according to the RCN, the average NHS nurses pays £34,000. So what is your definition of it? Because at the end of the day, Kathy, I'm 100% agreement with you. When you're frontline, whether it be the armed forces, the NHS, fire, you want to pay them significant sums of money. Yeah. But it's economically not realistic. It simply isn't realistic. That's the sad truth. So how do you weigh up the balance between what your heart wants to do and what your economic head says you can do?
Yeah. OK, right. Thanks, guys. Good start. Now, being on Twitter or catching criminals, Home Secretary Suella Braverman thinks that the police are spending too much time on the former and not enough time on the latter. What do you think? I want to hear your stories of your interactions with the police recently. Did they solve a crime of which you were a victim? I'm going to be asking if our police are in touch with what we need. We'll be back in a minute.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us on Bev Turner today on GB News. Now, are the police out of touch? I don't even like that question because, frankly, I love police officers and we would be nowhere without our police. Security and feeling safe is absolutely at the fundamental basics of living in this country, is it not? But yesterday, the Home Secretary has urged police chiefs to focus on what she calls common sense policing and not politically correct distractions. Speaking at a police conference in Westminster, Suella Braverman said the public expects the police to be tackling crime, not debating topics such as gender on Twitter. Let's have a listen.
Our police officers, your police officers' time is precious. And the public want the police to be tackling crime, not debating gender on Twitter. I've asked my officials to revisit the issue of non-crime hate incidents as a first step, as I want to be sure that we are allowing you to prioritise your time and your energy to deal with the threats to people and their property.
It's tough for the police, isn't it? Because for many years, they've been told that they have to be very careful around gender and race, quite rightly. And now it feels like the message is, well, don't have to worry about all that. Just get on and catch some criminals. Let me know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Johnny Gould, let me come to you. Have you had any interactions with the police lately,
again,
sir?
I've got to put my hand up, Kelly, because my grandpa, my paternal grandpa, was a very senior police officer in South London. Old school police, wonderful human being. And therefore, obviously, my instincts are very positive about the police and being very supportive.
Yeah.
I'm always very respectful of the police, particularly when I'm getting stopped because I'm possibly going a little bit too fast in my car, et cetera, et cetera. So my feelings are very, I need to put my hand up and make sure that you know that I'm obviously going to come from it from that perspective. I think my grandpa would turn in his grave, if I'm brutally honest, sometimes, with modern policing. Because I do accept the comment made about common sense. The lack of common sense when applying modern-day policing frightens me. It absolutely frightens me. The fact that apparently you could phone up and say that you've been burgled and there's no guarantee a police officer will even attend your house.
Well, I think
that
we
is
were all
a crazy
surprised
change in priority.
When Suella Braverman said recently, we're changing the system and they're changing the policy, and now if you've been burgled in your home, a police officer will come and see you.
But isn't that crazy?
At which point, you mean you don't?
Exactly.
I mean, to have somebody burgle your home is like the greatest kind of violation. It was horrible, Kathy, isn't it?
Well, also, my son the other day, my son's autistic. In the morning his bike was stolen. It was tied up in Covent Garden. In the afternoon, he was mugged and his wallet was stolen.
Oh, poor guy.
But just to say a positive thing, the worst side of human nature, but also the best side of human nature, a passerby saw he was distressed and gave him 20 quid to get home.
Yeah.
But the police didn't come to that. We went to the police station and got a crime...
You found a police station.
Yeah,
that
was open.
Was an achievement.
But I have to also say I have a lot of police in my family, even though I'm convict stock. My convict ancestors were guilty of one thing only, not running fast enough, OK? But my sister was a police chief psychologist of New South Wales. My grandfather was a policeman. My brother-in-law's a detective. So, I'm very sympathetic to the police in lots of ways. But we have to also say, when you're saying, they're talking about gender too much on talking about equality and gender, let's just remember Sarah Everard. They need to be talking about sexual politics, and they need to be talking about being politically correct, because women have no trust in the police force right now.
Yeah.
So those issues do have to be addressed.
Yeah.
At the same time, I also want more bobbies on the beat, so...
And more police stations. And this is the thing, isn't it, William? I guess you've never known anything but. We're all old enough to remember what it was like when you used to see police officers walking down the street, and if there was a crime, they would come to your house and they would sit there and they would find out what happened, and they might even go away and do some investigation into it. What's your take on the police as a 22-year-old? Like, what do you feel they're there for?
Well, I think the sort of fundamental values that the police should hold to are the same as when Stuart Peel introduced them almost 200 odd years ago, which is that they're there to be the public in uniform. They're there to protect the public. They're there to solve crime and to keep criminals off the streets. And I think one of the problems that we have is obviously police numbers have fluctuated over the last couple of decades, but one of the major problems we have is actually the amount of bureaucracy, the various different sort of pieces of legislation, etc., that the police now have to comply with that get in the way of them being able to do their jobs. And I think we see, for a variety of reasons, for the pressure that we now have on public services, the police often find themselves doing jobs that they shouldn't be doing, that should be handled by other organs of the state, such as dealing with people with sort of mental health issues, but also things like this. I think it's the 2003 Malicious Communications Act is one of the reasons why they're spending all their time dealing with people saying something rude on Twitter, rather than actually dealing with burglaries and other cases, such as, we have a sort of shockingly low number of sort of rape cases that go to conviction, which is one of the many reasons why, you say, in particular, sort of young women and friends of mine, indeed, have such low confidence in the police at the moment. But I think the situation is recoverable. The legislation needs to be changed. Yes, I think some things need to be done on numbers, but I think that sometimes that's a bit of a sort of false argument. But I'm quite pro the police, fundamentally. I used to actually want to be a police officer, but of the sort of Inspector Morse, Jaguar driving, real ale drinking variety, rather than your average Bobby on the beat. So I am quite pro police in that sense.
See, my mother was the first. We've all got a police connection here. You're too young to really. You're not been. Wasn't the first police officer? Didn't he share your name in the first Met?
Yeah,
police
I think
officer?
so. Yeah, I think the first Met police officer was called William Atkinson.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm either related or named after. But,
Fired on his first week or.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the story. It's a long time since I've researched it properly.
Yeah, well, my mum was the first female voluntary police officer in the country.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a claim to fame.
I know. She went and said, I'd like to volunteer as a police officer, and they said, we don't have women. And she said, well, why not? And so she was. I know. Anyway, right, let me know what you think. And do you feel that the police are doing the job that they are paid to do? They have a difficult job, I know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, after the break, Matt Hancock is finally in the jungle. Is he really going to make the public feel any differently about politicians, or are people just going to make him eat the bugs for entertainment? That and more after your morning news.
Good morning, it's 10:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak will meet with leaders of the devolved Irish Premier today for the first time since becoming Prime Minister. He's expected to urge the nation's together by unity. Mr Sunak will meet his Irish counterpart, Michael Martin, and First Ministers Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford at the British-Irish Council Summit in Blackpool. The absence of a power-sharing executive means Northern Ireland won't be represented by any politicians at the talks. Mr Sunak will become the first Prime Minister to attend the summit in over a decade. President Joe Biden says it was a good day for democracy and America after voters cast their final ballots in the US midterm elections. The White House shared video of the president last night, congratulating many Democrats who'd won hard-fought races. Control of the Senate still hangs in the balance, but Republicans look set to take the House of Representatives. The results, though, have defied expectations, with many experts predicting a red wave of Republican victories. America's top general estimates more than 100,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the start of the war in Ukraine. General Mark Milley estimates Kyiv may well have suffered a similar number of casualties. He put the figure of civilians killed in the war so far at around 40,000. The Kremlin yesterday announced the withdrawal of Russian forces from the strategic southern city of Kherson. And the former Chancellor Philip Hammond has told GB News he supports a windfall tax for oil and gas companies. In an exclusive interview with Gloria De Piero, he said he'd be surprised if the current Chancellor fails to extend the windfall tax. Jeremy Hunt announces his autumn statement next Thursday. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had announced the tax when he was Chancellor, describing it as a 25% energy profits levy. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Bev Turner today is back in just a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, it's 10:35. This is Bev Turner Today on GB News. Thank you for joining us. OK, now a 72-year-old man has been jailed for 6 months for trying to hide the fact that he served mince pies and wine at his shooting club during lockdown. Licensee Maurice Snelling broke Tier 3 restrictions. Remember those? And his neighbours told the police. He claimed in court that he thought his premises were in Tier 2 over the border in Cheshire, where you could drink alcohol if you'd had a substantial meal. Presumably he panicked. He then asked the CCTV company to erase the footage of people drinking and eating at his premises, and that was what got him sent down. What do you make of this story? Who do I come to first? Johnny Gould.
Well, let's talk about common sense regarding
You like wine, you like mince pies.
I mean, look at the facts. He's 72. Now, I know he's been sent to jail because he pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice, and that is serious.
Yeah.
No question.
Absolutely.
But he's 72. Is he a threat to society? No, 100% not.
Was there a victim of his crime as well, I would say?
Very valid point. So, you could fine him, you could suspend a sentence, etc. Just, again, where is the common sense? Whether it be the way the police enact their duties and their responsibilities, and how this judge has reacted. You were telling us off air about a comment that the judge had made, that he was anti-establishment.
So when the judge sentenced him, he said, Snelling is anti-establishment, especially to the police. He doesn't like being told what to do. And I thought, well, he sounds like my kind of guy. And when he comes out of prison, if he wants me to go around for a glass of wine and a mince pie, I will happily
Is a mince pie a substantial meal, Bev?
Well, this is the point. A mince pie wasn't a substantial meal, and he was also, but in the area at the time, you could only have food as a takeaway. And he runs like a shooting, You know what a shooting school is. You've spent a lot of time in there, Johnny, haven't you?
We shoot.
What's it called?
No, we shoot from the lip. That's what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't shoot literally.
As does he, right?
Yeah,
so the neighbours dobbed him in and said he shouldn't be doing this. Apparently, he's had a series of heart attacks because of the stress of all of this happening.
Probably all those mince pies.
If only his address had been Downing Street, he'd be fine. He'd got a light fine.
Do we know the interaction that he had with the neighbours? Did the neighbours go round and say, look, what you're doing is actually against the law. Yeah. Please stop.
The allegations...
do what a communal neighbour should do, rather than phone up the police who've got more important things to do with their time.
A crucial part of this, though, is that you were saying about common sense, is that, frankly, though, yes, obviously he broke the laws and the regulations there in place at the time, however farcical and stupid they were, both at the time and in hindsight. But he did destroy, or attempt to destroy, the CCTV evidence. You know, so he displayed a lack of common sense in doing that, which I think has exacerbated the crime that he already
committed. Doesn't that tell you, though, of the fear and the panic that people suffered during that period of time of not wanting to... I wouldn't have thought he was the kind of guy... Well, they said he was previously of excellent character, and he panicked.
And is that not relevant?
I think it's entirely relevant. What do you think, Kathy?
Well, I think the rules were so confusing at the time. You know, let's talk to Dominic Cummings, who was ricocheting halfway up the country to see his father.
Check his eyesight was working.
I mean, every day we're like, can we meet outside? Can we meet inside? Can we have a fire pit? Are we allowed to see one friend? Can I tongue kiss my boyfriend? It was very confusing.
It was.
And it is a bit... And it is a bit Orwellian. In fact, I was down in Richmond the other day where Orwell's house is. Yeah. There's a CCTV camera right outside Orwell's house. I thought, if he could see that, he'd...
The irony.
The irony,
It is. It's Kafkaesque. He's gone to prison for 6 months, and it says the allegations came to light after residents reported concerns about gatherings at the club between Congleton and Rushton Spencer, it's in Cheshire, in December 2020 and January 21. He didn't respond to requests by the police to review the CCTV footage. He probably thought you've got better things to do. And he later contacted the CCTV contractor to say, can you just wipe any pictures of people eating mince pies and drinking wine in my club, please? And then they dobbed him into the police as well.
Yeah, I think if you're going to start putting people down simply for A, breaking COVID regulations, B, then trying to pervert the court of justice. But if you're actually sending somebody to prison for 6 months for being anti-establishment, that's frankly slightly terrifying.
It is.
And I think as a great Orwell fan myself, I do find that rather chilling. But also, you know, this show and the rest of the channel wouldn't manage to get any guests if you're going to start arresting people just for being anti-establishment.
And find out what has some people done to be sent down for 6 months, and then draw a comparison. Muggings, violent attacks, who get 6 months. And this is a 72-year-old.
And if he is anti-disestablishment, actually, we were saying earlier, anti-disestablishmentarianism, I think is the longest word in the English language.
I can't believe I knew something about words that Kathy Lake doesn't, but actually, it's pseudo-anti-disestablishmentarianism. Excellent word in the English.
Top trumps
here.
Yeah.
But if he does go to jail is just a university for crime. You'll just learn how to do better crimes now and get away with it.
Well, I mean, the poor guy, he's 72 years old. I mean, it's the Public Health Act, isn't it, that the government used to clamp down on people and impose restrictions during lockdown. So these acts still they're still there loitering in the background. You know, they haven't completely removed these powers. You were at university during lockdown then, William. Did you adhere to every rule and every ridiculous restriction on your freedoms?
I must admit, no, we didn't necessarily sort of follow every restriction, but that's because...
Of course, you're a Tory.
It's in
your DNA. We know that.
We were young and silly, and the rules, they changed so quickly that often we got quite confused about them. And I think, you know, I was told off by college basically a few times for being slightly naughty, but then all of us were. You know, and for those of us who were lucky enough to actually get back to university during the year when so many people were forced to, you know, stay at home, it became incredibly difficult all the time to adhere to all the rules. At the same time, you know, I have lots of elderly relatives, so I understood why some of the restrictions were in place as much as I might dislike them, and I always, you know, sanitise my hands and all the rest. But yeah, I think what is as terrifying, as you say, there was a lot of this legislation is still on the statute book, and I think I agree with Lord Sumption that a lot of it was taken beyond what it was originally supposed to be designed to do. But more importantly, if we were now then to offer a COVID amnesty, you know, to say anybody who was found to have broken COVID laws, you're now forgiven, that is as terrifying as the laws being there in the first place, because that's saying the government can sort of can criminalise aspects of daily life and then can decriminalise aspects of daily life at a whim. And I think it's just a sign of just how bizarre and how terrifying, actually, some of the regulations and the power they gave to the government were. That even now you're seeing somebody, being forced to go to prison for 6 months for something.
But to be fair, you said most of us broke the rules. Most of us didn't break the rules, actually. I mean, so many people couldn't see their loved ones for so long. Their loved one died without them seeing them. So it is a really serious issue, and we should never let Downing Street off the hook for that.
I agree.
So, you know, we did try and stick to the rules, and it was terribly boring and horrible, but we did, apart from you.
Well, no, I think it's sort of case that I think everybody on a daily basis would have made some sort of minor infraction without knowing it.
I agree with you, William.
I
I think most people, I mean, it depends on what your definition of breaking the rules is, but in a minor manner, I think that almost everyone at some stage probably overstepped the mark.
I think in criminology classes, the first thing they teach you is that everybody breaks laws all the time without knowing it, of some degree or another. So I think you then apply that to criminalising aspects of daily life, as we saw during the COVID period. I think I wouldn't be surprised if people, you know, were breaking various regulations at various different points every week without knowing it.
And very much depended on how frightened people were, right? Because that was what was clear from Downing Street, that when they were breaking the rules, they weren't frightened of COVID. Some people were frightened. Some people remain really frightened, tragically. There are still some elderly people who I know of, and friends' parents, who've never gone back to living the active and engaged life that they lived before COVID. Ron says, sitting in a nice comfy chair in a warm office with a coffee machine, reading other people's social media posts, or running about in the cold and wet trying to catch criminals. I know which I would prefer. We were talking about the police and whether they're getting the balance right between the things that we expect them to do and the things that they appear to sometimes be spending too much time doing. Why are the woke police letting the Stop Oil get away with it? And the court, says John, it's the same if you have a burglary incident number given to you, end of story. Sadly not fit for purpose anymore. And Nicholas says, I'm a retired police officer. I feel strongly that the current situation was very much brought about by the policies of Theresa May and other secretaries before her, Home Secretaries before her. It was a fact that as soon as the new fad in crime was raised, the then Home Secretary would direct the chief police officers to prioritise it. Senior police officers would jump on the poor Bobby on the beat, would be told, you will do this, you will do that. The end result was that street police officers would end up chasing their tails and concentrating on the crime fad of the day. Let us know what you think, particularly if you are a police officer. I think it is a really difficult job, and thank goodness that anybody wants to.
And I think, Bev, that's a really valid point, that ultimately the police pursue their job with direct orders from above. The Home Secretary is the ultimate boss. If they're told to do something, they do it. And it's impossible if the boundaries are constantly being changed.
Feels like that,
there should be a recognition of what a policeman and a policewoman's job is and how it should be done. There should be some basic rules that should never be changed.
And they need
the
to
sense
feel
of priority is
supported,
crazy.
right? And the police officers themselves need to feel supported by the levels of power above them. Right, now, finally, he is in the jungle. We've been talking about it this week. Everybody's talking about it. It's on the front pages of all the papers, particularly on The Guardian. I'm not quite sure where all these media was when he was making ridiculous decisions, but anyway, Hancock finally entered the jungle and faced his first Bush Tucker trial. I'd prefer he faced a different kind of trial. I don't know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Keep those coming in. When we've talked about this week, some of you think that our panel has been too harsh on Matt Hancock, and a lot of you think that we're not going far enough. So, William, let's start with you. Are Conservative Party members despairing at his presence there?
I think so, and I think especially, I think the comments of the deputy chair of his constituency association, I seem to remember, said that he was looking forward to seeing the man for whom he has campaigned for so long to get him into and then keep him in Parliament. He was looking forward to seeing him eating, I think, kangaroo's testicles. So that shows, I think, the level of opinion that a lot of Tory members are directing at Matt Hancock at the moment. I must say, I must defend his decision to go into the jungle. I think it's clear that his political career isn't going anywhere, so if he thinks this will actually sort of be able to further the causes for which he wishes to pursue, then he should go ahead and do so, especially if he donates his salary to charity. But more importantly, I wish he would. But I mean, more importantly, I think the less time that politicians spend in Westminster, the less chance they have of Hancocking some things up, as we've seen in the last few months, especially. So why can't we send more people to Australia?
I agree with the fact that they should be out and about in the public, but the Australian jungle, Cathy, is not the place to go to understand how the real man lives their life.
Well, first of all, could you stop sending your rejects out to the colonies, please? I remember when I told my grandma I was moving to England, she said, "Oh, Kath, you can't possibly go and live in London. That's where all those terrible convicts come from." So, you know, could you cease and desist? Also, I feel sorry for the animals. I think we should contact the RSPCA and say, "Oh, my God, they mustn't have exposure to Matt Hancock. It's too cruel." Obviously, he's doing this because he has a huge divorce bill. I mean, this is a guy who went straight from puberty to adultery. You know, and you would think if you're an adulterer, you have to actually be an adult first, but apparently no.
I'd really respect him if he said...
Wouldn't it? Yes, if he was honest.
Divorced. It's really expensive. Yeah. I need the money. I think we would respect him more, but the idea that he's going in there to promote dyslexia and so people will understand what politicians are like. Did you see it last night, Johnny, when he walked into the camp? The faces of his campmates were fascinating because I thought he might be greeted more warmly than he was. Yeah. He obviously thought he was going to be greeted more warmly than he was. But actually, nobody likes Matt Hancock because if you have someone who died with COVID, you don't like him because he didn't protect your loved one. And that there are people like that, of course, there are lots of them. If you have any objections to the restrictions that he placed upon us, you also dislike him because you feel like that. You know what it is? You felt like he never justified his decisions. He was just slimy, and he said, "This is what you're going to do," and he never really told us the why.
Part of the problem as well, he's just a bit of a charmless individual. I mean,
he's a weirdo.
Well, OK, that's one way of describing it. People question, because there are many people out there that still like Boris Johnson and many that absolutely hate him with every bone in their body. But the reason why people that do like him is because there's a charm, there's a humour. I look at Matt Hancock, I just don't understand how he ever got voted in because he just seems incredibly charmless. And yet, and this is a little scoop for you. In addition to doing The Jungle, I know that he's also done the Celebrity SAS, Who Dares Wins, which hasn't obviously broadcast yet.
Channel 4.
And I know Jason Fox. Foxy's one of the SAS boys. And he said to me that he gave him such a hard time, deliberately, because he was incensed about exactly the things you've just been referring to. And he said, I can't believe I'm telling you this. By the end, I was really impressed by the man.
What?
His level of intelligence is what he said. He said apparently during those whole psychological torture issues, he said he ran rings around them. And he said, but also his fitness, his courage, he said, you will see a different person. So I hate to admit it, that perhaps I have no respect for a man who's got a job and he isn't doing his job. If he'd resigned and said, I'm going to stand down, I'm going in a different direction, no issue with that whatsoever. But to go in when you are still a standing member of Parliament, absolute nonsense. Total lack of respect.
I wonder what his
But I think we will
constituents...
see a different Matt Hancock.
But I wonder what his constituents think of him skylarking off while he's being paid, going off and earning all this other money. I think the thing about him is that his ego is incredible. He's got elephantiasis of the ego. He's probably got love bites on his mirror. And he clearly keeps fit by doing step aerobics off his own ego, I think. So it's quite fascinating.
Kathy, as if by magic, literally, this is the beauty of social media. You said, I want to know what his constituents think. Well, one of them has got in touch with us. This is Amber from Matt Hancock's constituency. I'm in his constituency. I support his decision to take part in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. I welcome the chance to get to see a real and vulnerable side of my MP. At the end of this, I will know more about my MP than others will know about theirs. As with most decisions made by politicians, political or personal, it will divide opinion. But for me, he is human. He's made big mistakes. But doesn't everyone deserve a chance to potentially change this? You are more forgiving than I am, Amber. No politician aims to cause damage. For the most part, they are operating in unknown territory and their intention is to do good. The media are powerful. They will make better headlines if he's disliked. I'm not sure he can change opinion, but give him a chance. It's 3 weeks, not 3 months. Go on, William.
Well, I think, leaving aside what one may think about him as a man, or what one thinks about what the actions he took as health secretary, spending time with the SAS, getting himself covered in mud doing that, or spending time with creepy crawlies and eating, koala scrotum or whatever that he will be doing down in the jungle. I think it's
Australian delicacy.
Yeah,
how many of those?
Yeah, it's sufficient punishment, if nothing else, for his crimes against snogging that he committed across all the front pages last year.
Yeah.
So at least if he learns anything from the last year or so, it's how better than to.
You see, in some ways, one of the things that I've talked about almost every day this week is why there aren't better people going into politics, right? You will be Prime Minister one day, William. So keep talking to us, won't you, at that tape? But, there are not enough people going to politics. What I hope Matt Hancock will show is that anybody who's sitting their A-levels or their GCSEs next year, they will realise that these politicians are not superhumans. They are not intellectual giants. They just have a very, very thick skin, don't they? In your experience with the politicians you've met, they're not necessarily brilliant individuals. They're just deeply ambitious.
Yeah, and I think especially it is a particular ego thing. And with the rise of social media as well, aspects of being a politician, being an MP have become more difficult. But I think you compare the sort of people who go into politics compared to people who go into sort of other walks of life. You know, a lot of them have the opportunity to go and earn a lot more in, say, something like finance. So in some cases, they go into politics because they have a particular sense of duty. Other people go into politics because they have a particularly large ego. And I think it's difficult often with some politicians to differentiate between the two. And quite frankly, I think there are MPs that we have at the moment who are weaker than previous generations. There are also some who would, be able to have gone toe-to-toe with William Pitt the Younger and all the rest.
Yeah.
So I think just classifying a single politician based on one period they have in office or one particular set of headlines or even a particular impression of them that's been generated through the media and previous comments and all the rest is unfair. And I think hopefully he has the opportunity to put himself across and people can actually see after a week or two whether they actually like him as a person or whether he's still going to always be the bogeyman that he currently is.
Were you at university with people who will go straight into politics and have huge aspirations to run the country?
Definitely. I can remember on my first day, about 3 different PBSs came up to me and said, "Oh, yes, I'm going to be Prime Minister one day," which is why I think, if one does go to university and you're interested in politics, please don't tell anybody that you are, because they will just write you off as being a weirdo for the rest of your time there. And I think, again, there are a lot of people I was at university with who are the sort of people who see themselves as the next Prime Minister, but a lot of them actually weren't very hardworking or, in my opinion, particularly talented or knowledgeable. And so we often say we want to get more people from outside of politics to get into politics. And I think somebody like Rishi Sunak, who I have a lot of time for and a lot of respect for, is somebody who was actually incredibly successful in private life and then through a sense of duty and because he'd made an awful lot of money decided to go into politics.
Should that not be a change that we look to make for our modern day politicians? Because you rewind, you're a student of history at Oxford, yes?
Yeah.
You go back 100, 200 years, politicians were rock and roll. Disraeli, Palmerston, these guys were superstars. They were iconic. Yeah. And now, you've rightly said, they're not. There's very few that have that impact. But then I ask the question, if you're going to pay the Prime Minister, the most powerful man or woman in the country, £160,000, is it any surprise you're not getting superstars? Because comparative to other CEOs in other industries, it's peanuts. That's a sad reality.
There's always this question about corruption with politicians, Cathy, isn't there? And money. And we look at Matt Hancock in The Jungle. He's rumoured to be getting £350,000 to £400,000 for that. He probably got, I don't know,
half of what Boyd George is getting.
Is that right?
Boyd George apparently is, my understanding, is getting paid the most that's ever been paid.
But Matt Hancock is?
No, Boyd George.
Boyd George is getting paid. He's getting paid about nearly £900,000.
Yeah, I mean, I get asked to go on that show every year.
I bet you do.
I do, but I'm thinking, you'd have to be really scraping the bottom of the career barrel to go there.
It'd be amazing.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
Tune in.
I'd rather gnaw through my own ovary than go on.
You'd have to.
I have to survive, yeah, that's right.
You would be brilliant on it, though, Cathy.
Oh.
If you were in there with Matt Hancock, how would you have greeted him last night? Because I know how I would have done.
Well, I would have put him in social Siberia, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't. I'd have taken him to one corner and had an absolute frank conversation.
Barney, would you?
I just have so many questions. And the woman from Channel 4 News, is she, or I don't know, the woman who did take him to one side, was she a loose woman? And she sort of said, "Why are you in here?" And maybe she was being polite because it was day one. I would not have been so polite.
I think it's time you went into the jungle.
I would love to be in there with Matt Hancock under normal circumstances. I'm not sure I would have been that keen, but can you imagine having all that time with him? He'd have come out demented. I'd have sent him round the bend. He'd have been asking to get out within half an hour. I just have so many questions.
But Bev, you're an instinctively nice person. If he was polite and patient, would you not ultimately, in the end, that might impact a little on your view of him?
I was genuinely thinking that last night as I was watching the telly, and I was thinking, if I had 3 weeks in the jungle with him, could he have won me over by the end?
He does a lot of swimming, so you might have something in common.
He would have had to have come up with some excellent answers to my questions.
The reason he's good at swimming, he's always in hot water and too deep.
Well, but some huge apologies, and I want to see contrition, I want to see humility. Yeah. I want to see him hold his hands up and say, we got a lot of stuff wrong. wrong. And this is why.
Yeah.
Anyway, right, that is the end of our first hour. Thank you for sticking with us. We're going to be back for more after this short break, including should the government be looking after our own nation before helping others abroad? That's coming up next.
Good morning. We won't see as much sunshine today as we did yesterday. It's going to be another blustery day, though, and a very mild day, and particularly mild overnight tonight. Last night, we've had milder air tracking in from the southwest, this warmer air enveloping the country, bringing with it also some gusty winds. These weather fronts also bringing with them a fairly wet day across the Western Isles of Scotland and parts of the Highlands. The rain persistent here and at times heavy. Also, that's where the strongest winds will be, but it's going to be fairly gusty wherever you are today. A bit of drizzly rain at times across North Wales, North West England, mostly over hills. For many, it will be a dry day. Just predominantly cloudy. We could see some breaks in the cloud across the east, a bit of sunshine. May see temperatures reach 17 degrees, but even where it's cloudy, look at these, 15, 16 across the board. Very mild for this time of year. It's going to be an exceptionally mild night. We will keep wet weather across northwest Scotland. Some rain pushing back into Northern Ireland, perhaps into southern Scotland as well. Some drizzly conditions for England and Wales here and there, but most will just stay dry and cloudy. The winds will ease a touch overnight, but still wafting in the mild air. 13, 14, the overnight minimum temperatures. That's above the average maxima for most of us at this time of year. So a very mild start to tomorrow. It's a similar kind of day, certainly for most of England and Wales. Generally cloudy but dry. Some drizzle, most likely over the hills of Wales and northwest England. But there will be more persistent rain for northwest Scotland, perhaps some for Northern Ireland too, and at times across southern Scotland, although again chiefly over the hills. Temperatures 16, 17 degrees, even across northeast Scotland. That is really quite remarkable. Saturday's a similar kind of day, although as the winds ease, it may turn a bit more misty and murky, and temperatures perhaps not quite as high, but it's staying very mild.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
Good morning and welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. Join us until midday today for an hour of more unfiltered, honest discussion with my fabulous panel of guests. We've got William Atkinson from the Conservative Home.
Conservative Home, yeah.
Website, journalism. It's a good website, actually.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad.
Yeah, no, yes, all right. We've got Kathy Letts here, who needs no introduction, novelist, comedian and a resident of this country for 30 years or so, and Johnny Gould. who is a broadcaster and also a new face to GB News. Now, we're asking in this hour, should charity begin at home? Well, it always used to, didn't it? But it seems at the moment that this government is incredibly keen to support countries other than our own at a time of economic disaster. And new research into calories on food, we're going to go into that in a moment. Let's just talk about this then. So charity does it begin at home, guys? Rishi Sunak was at COP this weekend. Oh, sorry, guys, we're going to the news. In just a moment, we're going to have research into calories on food labels and whether you would exercise to burn them off. If it told you how many calories was in that particular item of food, we're going to be looking at all of that after the news.
Minutes past 11, I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak will meet with leaders of the devolved nations and Irish Premier today for the first time since becoming Prime Minister. We cross live to our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who's in Westminster for us now. Catherine, what can we expect from the meeting of the British Irish Council today and tomorrow?
Yes, Rishi Sunak up in Blackpool to meet with the Irish government. He will be having a meeting with the Irish Taoiseach Michael Martin. Obviously, we will be looking for potential progress on the very thorny issue of the Northern Irish Protocol. Rishi Sunak's expected to say that everybody wants power sharing in Northern Ireland up and running again as soon as possible. And they are going to work very hard to ensure that that happens. Also, he will be meeting with First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford. They are also included in this British Irish Council summit. He will also be filling them in on plans for the autumn statement, which is, of course, just a week today.
Catherine, thank you. Catherine Forster, our political reporter in Westminster for us there. President Joe Biden says it was a good day for democracy and America after voters cast their final ballots in the US midterm elections yesterday. The White House shared video of the president last night congratulating many Democrats who'd won hard-fought races. Control of the Senate still hangs in the balance, but Republicans look set to take the House of Representatives. The results, though, have defied expectations, with many experts predicting a red wave of Republican victories. America's top general estimates more than 100,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the start of the war in Ukraine. General Mark Milley estimates Kyiv may well have suffered a similar number of casualties. He puts the figure of civilians killed in the war so far at around 40,000. The Kremlin yesterday announced the withdrawal of Russian forces from the strategic southern city of Kherson. President Vladimir Zelensky has warned against complacency. The Royal College of Nursing is urging the government to take action over pay or face disruption across the country. The union announced its first ever national strike yesterday, with 300,000 members voting in favour of walkouts. It's expected to impact the majority of NHS employers, although emergency care won't be affected. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland says nurses were recognised for their work during the pandemic.
But the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, who quote, want 17%. Now, that is a high ask given the economic times that we are in. And so I actually generally think all these things can be solved by dialogue, and it's really important that dialogue continues, because no one wants to see a strike. I'm absolutely sure of that.
The former Chancellor Philip Hammond has told GB News he supports a windfall tax for oil and gas companies. In an exclusive interview with Gloria De Piero, he said he'd been surprised if the current Chancellor fails to extend the windfall tax. Jeremy Hunt announces his autumn statement next Thursday. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced the tax when he was Chancellor, describing it as a 25% energy profits levy. Lord Hammond says the government will need to raise more tax revenue if it wants to maintain the same level of public service.
Happens, I am broadly in favour of a windfall tax, so long as it's sensibly structured and only tackles the genuinely windfall element. not the cyclical ups and downs that you get in energy markets, because energy companies plan around those cycles of lower profits and higher profits over different periods of years. But where genuine windfalls are earned, I think it is legitimate to tax them.
And you can watch that interview with Lord Hammond speaking to Gloria De Piero in full here on GB News tomorrow at 3:30. Eco-activists blocked the M25 in multiple locations for the 4th day in a row this morning. 5 arrests have been made so far after Just Stop Oil protesters climbed gantries at junctions along the motorway in Essex and Surrey. One lane had been closed for a while earlier, but all lanes between junction 28 and 29 are now open. A tube strike is causing disruption across London today with extremely limited services on the Underground. Our London reporter Alice Porter is at King's Cross Station for us. What's the latest, Alice?
Hi there. Well, the queue for taxis here at King's Cross Station just keeps on growing. So many people are having to get taxis around the capital, but they're also having to get on buses as well, because at the moment people are unable to get across the capital on the London Underground, but they are able to get across using the Elizabeth Line and the London Overground. But this is the 6th strike that has taken place this year in the capital, and this is because of an ongoing dispute between TfL over issues to do with pensions and job cuts. The government bailed out TfL after the pandemic multiple times for billions of pounds, but in response they wanted TfL to review their pension scheme, which is a very generous final salary scheme. Of course, the RMT workers do not want this, and this is why they're taking to the streets again for another protest, which is the 6th one this year, causing chaos across the capital.
Indeed, Alice, and we're being told to check before we travel. Thank you, Alice Porter there at King's Cross Station. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Bev Turner today.
Good morning, this is Bev Turner today on GB News. If you're just joining us, I am with, this morning, William Atkinson, Assistant Editor of Conservative Home, Johnny Gould, broadcaster and journalist, and Kathy Lett, celebrated author. Also, I want to hear from you. Get in touch as usual on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, should charities start at home? We keep hearing about the cost of living crisis, the black hole in public finances, and how Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is going to have to make some very difficult decisions. However, this year, the British taxpayer committed £220 million of humanitarian aid and £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine. The UK's annual foreign aid budget is a total of £12 billion. At COP27, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said he would not be he ultimately said he'd not be in favour of paying climate reparations, but he did say that triple funding for climate adaptation in poorer countries from £500 million in 2019 to £1.5 billion in 2025. In contrast, the government at home is investing £2 billion over the next 3 years to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping. So why do our government, William, seem so keen to give money away to other countries when we're really struggling here?
Well, I think the bigger question about this, Bev, is the actual amount of money that the government spends, which is, as large as it may seem as a sum, £2.3 billion, which I think is what we've so far committed in humanitarian aid, or military aid indeed, to Ukraine, compared to, say, the amount the government has already spent on helping people with their energy bills, 37 billion, or the amount that was pledged for the energy price guarantee before the fall in the gas prices, which was upwards of 100 billion to 150 billion pounds. So I think, though this might seem like quite a large amount of money, actually compared to the amount that the government is spending on so many other things, it is actually essentially peanuts. And I think one of the sort of broader questions that we should ask is when it comes to things like developmental aid, are we sort of spending money in the right place? And I think that's why a lot of the talk in the last few years about reducing the 0.7% commitment to 0.5%, though I think it's scheduled to go back up to 0.7% in a couple of years' time, is of GDP, is so crucial, because I think there is a lot of public anger when money is being spent, and also the old thing about Ethiopian sort of Spice Girls and things like that. All of those are very good at making headlines, but actually what we want to talk about is how effective is this in helping people on the ground, in the same way as we would be wanting to say, if the government has, say, it's going to invest several billion into tackling homelessness at home, we don't want that then used on initiatives that aren't actually effective in helping getting people into accommodation and the like. And I think, as I say, the amount compared to the amount that we're already spending to pay up people with their energy bills and in other areas is very small. And as a sort of boring, economically minded, fiscally conservative kind of chap, what I'm most bothered about is whether this money is actually spent in the most efficient way possible. Because, of course, the more efficiently the government spends the money, the more money there is then to spend on other things.
Johnny, when we've got a cost of living crisis, let's say, we've got inflation like it is, when everybody's supermarket trolley is costing them so much more, then I think we start to become perhaps a little less charitable about money that we send overseas. Now, you work in the charity sector largely. That's one way of describing what you do, isn't it?
Yes.
Are you seeing a difference in what people are prepared to donate to charities?
Well, I host charity auctions on a regular basis, and I've got 21 this month alone.
Haven't you raised more? That's your world record, that you raised more money doing charity auctions than anybody else.
I believe so.
Do you auction yourself off as a love god?
Tragically, we actually want to raise money, Kathy. So that has never really crossed my mind. But thank you. Well, it's interesting you should say this, because I think I've done about 5 auctions where it's the support of Ukraine has been the benefiting charity, various charities. There's a couple of footballers, Andrei Shevchenko, the Chelsea legend, he did one. And I was blown away, because these are tough times, and understandably people are reining in. And so every auction I've done, whether it be for Cancer Research UK or any major charity, it's getting tougher and tougher. It's like getting blood out of a stone, because people are struggling. But it is amazing how much money these Ukrainian charity auctions have raised.
Really?
I've not struggled at all. They people literally sort of throwing their wallets at you, because I think the people of Britain are an incredibly generous people. To give you an example, my brother lives in France. The very first time, him and his mates, and they're all big into cycling, men that like to wear lycra, it's wrong on so many levels, but they were going to go on this massive cycle ride, and my brother goes, and these are all his French mates, and he goes, right, guys, let's get let's choose a charity, let's raise some money, we'll do something. And all his French friends are like, well, what are you talking about?
Right.
Literally, the concept...
It didn't occur to them.
Didn't even occur to them, because it's just not a part of their tradition. We, as a country, should be incredibly proud. We are second only, I believe, to the US when it comes to raising money for charitable causes. We're an incredibly generous people, and I see that day in, day out, doing the day job that I do. And just very quickly, to go to the initial issue that we're discussing, I have to say I don't have a problem with it, because what is one of the major reasons why we are struggling economically, why we have inflation? It's what's happening in Ukraine. And if we don't take a stand alongside, hopefully, the rest of the world, then what's happening in Ukraine, who knows what else Russia will do, and other countries that are not particularly friendly towards Western democracy. And then what is the long-term impact of that on our economy? So actually, it's about trying to create a world where economies can thrive.
But we've been talking about, Kathy, nurses striking because they're getting £32,000 a year and the conditions and pay are not good. And so we have to look at this, don't we? There'll be nurses screaming at the screen going, well, that's fine, but I'm sorry, but we are not in a position to be sending billions to the Ukrainian people when we need it here.
Well, if we took back all the money that the Tories gave to their chums for the PPE that was faulty, let's get all that money back and give that
billion on track and trace.
Give that to the nurses and look after people in the Ukraine. We should be able to do both. I mean, you're Wikipedia with a pulse. You know all the facts and figures. Isn't Britain the 5th biggest economy in the world?
I think it depends on how you measure it. Yes, we're about the 5th or 6th.
So we should have enough. I mean, I'm appalled at the poverty in Britain. I mean, it's Dickensian. And when people are saying, please, sir, can I have some more? It's the bankers getting their bonuses. You know, why is this terrible level of poverty in such a rich country? It's really appalling.
And yet we have one of the most beneficial, the most generous social benefit systems in the world as well. Like you say, we are a country that does look after people in need. Some would say we've got the balance wrong, William, that we're giving too much away.
Well, I'd say this is similar to the point I was making earlier, really, is that it's a sign of how wasteful organs of the British state are, that, as you say, we have a terrible problem with inequality, especially between the regions and outside of London, but also in terms of people who are genuinely sort of failed by various arms of the state at various levels. And to me, as a Conservative, turning around and saying, right, we're already spending X amount of our GDP designed to help these people in these various different situations, that suggests that, to me, that the social services that are in place are not functioning as they should have done. And I think one of the things that really got me interested in politics is the idea that you can have this sort of cycle of state failure that creates these sort of cycles of despair that's passed on from generation to generation, where people are failed by social services, they're failed by the education system, they're failed also by, the police, if they're living in areas of particularly sort of high crime rates, they're failed by sort of social housing and the like, and that's what traps people in despair. And I think one of the sort of best arguments that the Conservative Party has ever made is that it's the party on the side of helping people get on. It's the party of opportunity. And I think one of the government's failures over the last few years is not to make that into a reality. And a lot of the talk that we had in the last election about levelling up, for example, I don't think on the ground people are seeing that. And I think that's one of the broader reasons why the Tories are struggling in the polls at the moment, because we've promised to, equalise opportunities. And so far, frankly, we haven't really done a good job.
But that's often because the only people the Tories are helping up are people who are well off. We know that Britain has the worst social mobility in Europe. So remember that Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, rich man, poor man? You're born into some area of that class system and you pretty much stay there.
Well, I would say, though, the rich do pay a larger share of tax.
Oh, they could pay a lot more.
Yeah, but they pay a larger share of tax since 2010 under the Tories than they ever did under the last Labour government. So, parties of both stripes, going back decades, have allowed these sort of regional inequalities that we see at the moment to perpetuate themselves.
Julia's got in touch to say, I work with the homeless and there are veterans, people with mental health issues, etc., single parents escaping abuse out on the streets. I think it's disgusting that we're neglecting those people who are desperately in need in our own country in favour of sending billions overseas. Edward has asked, the bigger question to ask on spending money abroad is why are the markets fine with us sending unfunded vast amounts to Ukraine and other nations yet unfunded tax cuts for British people by Liz Truss suddenly created chaos. Thank you. Keep those views coming, won't you? We're going to be discussing how do we really measure beauty after a transgender teenager has become the first contestant to win a Miss America pageant. Has this caused outrage? And where does this leave the female competitors? Why on earth are they clapping? We'll be finding out after the break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Good morning, it's 11:21. You are watching and listening to Bev Turner on GB News. Now, teenager Brian Ungayan has become the first transgender contestant to win a Miss America beauty pageant. But is this right? Some people on social media have celebrated Ungayan's win. Others have heavily criticised the competition for taking away a scholarship that was meant for young women. So why are the people defeated so happy for her? That's the bit I find remarkable. Kathy Lett.
Yes.
as a famous feminist, are you conflicted by this?
At times I am. Of course, I'm all about inclusion and acceptance. And of course, trans people have suffered so much historically that why wouldn't we embrace the fact that they can live their lives they want the way they want to. I think it's funny they're smiling. Of course, people who lose in beauty pageant, they're all going for gold in the fixed smile event. We know that's fake. But I'm actually allergic to all beauty pageants. I mean, I would get rid of them all because I hate the way women are judged on their looks in a way that men aren't. I mean...
But I'm not sure they were judged on their looks in this case. If you're going by, like, the whole point, surely, of a beauty pageant is it's about... you are fitting a very narrow definition of Western stereotype of beauty, right?
Yeah.
You're thin, you've got big boobs, you've got shiny hair and all that. Like, that's what Johnny Gould is. You sort of give it a flush then at the idea of that. You quite enjoy. Shall I carry on? But, you know, this young lady does not conform to that stereotype. So why has she won this? Why has she been awarded this Miss America beauty pageant?
I'm no
award?
expert, Bev, on beauty pageants. But
you're an expert on women.
I'm not, but I have a view on this. I'm assuming that the judges that make the decisions are given a certain criteria. We're assuming it's purely on how shiny their hair is, how narrow their waist is, and all these old stereotypes that we've supposedly and should have moved on from years ago. But I'm not so sure that is the case. Can anybody tell me? Do beauty pageants determine beauty purely as something physical?
I mean, you know what? Miss World has always had this idea of, well, I do a lot for charity and I'm lovely to my grandma, and secretly the judges are like, quite fancy a bit of her, right? That's kind of how it's always been.
You always think you give them an award if they can actually spell the country name on their sash.
Well, yeah, exactly.
The clue is slightly in the name.
Stereotype, right? But what do you think, William? Do you think they've awarded her this as it's a virtue signalling?
Yeah,
it is.
Well, I would say so. I mean, I must say, as somebody relatively close to Brian in age, she wouldn't necessarily have been the person that I picked from that picture as being the most beautiful. But then, I think in beauty pageants you do have to sort of demonstrate a skill or something as well.
She's also still called Brian, which is an interesting choice.
Why? I've got trans friends and the like, and I'm sort of pretty easygoing on this. Really, I don't think it's. I'm a sort of libertarian in most respects when it comes to sort of social issues, but I mean, I also agree with all the sort of biology stuff. But I think more importantly, sort of cases like these kind of distract, and I think it's what you say is that the virtue signalling point is so correct, because when a competition like this has turned into basically an exercise and everybody's showing how conformist they are to the various sort of the nostrums of the day. Right, you know, and it just turns into people being judged not on their talent or indeed their looks, but simply on the fact that you'll get some good headlines from the right people, or the right people will applaud, or the right people will say the right things on Twitter by giving a particular result. It undermines the whole point of the competition, whether that's, you know, a beauty contest or, you know, cheering on. You know, we've discussed previously, you know, trans swimmers and the like in competitions perhaps which they shouldn't be in. And I think, as I say, I think this is just it's a big act in virtue signalling. And I think it looks rather fast.
But could we not take a more positive approach to this? Could we not maybe accept that perhaps this contestant was funny and witty and delightful and everybody loved her? And when you look at the other girls who are all cheering and smiling, it suggests to me they all really liked her.
I don't think they judge a beauty pageant on wit, even though it's better to be witty than pretty, I think, because wit, beauty's a diminishing asset, where wit gets sharper. I think it'd be much more radical if they had, equal opportunity sexism. We had a male beauty pageant. Why don't we ever have that?
No. In an auctioneer at a male beauty pageant.
Yeah, in their budgie smugglers parading up and down. I think that would be more radical for me.
That's actually quite common in the charity world. It used to be where they line up some very attractive young men and you bid on having a date with them.
You see,
in their swimming costumes, the way they make women wear. Yeah, exactly.
And Cathy, I'm with you in that. I want, you do you, hon, I'll do me. Live your life as you want to live, right? I will not interfere in your life, don't interfere in mine. And so, I agree with you that a lot of transgender people are some of the most vulnerable people in society, tied up in all sorts of emotional, genetic complications. But when you look at the role that women might be slowly having eroded, freedoms that we fought for are being undermined by a lot of the transgender activism, because I think there's a difference between the two, then I think we have some serious questions to ask. Because Leah Thomas is the swimmer. If I'd have been beaten by Leah Thomas on the 100 metres backstroke, I wouldn't have been stood on the podium clapping her. That's what I find fascinating by these girls who got beaten in the beauty pageant. That's their opportunity gone. And it's the same with the swimming. There was a literary prize, actually, and this is where you will have an opinion. So Tori Peters was a writer who was in the shortlist for a women-only prize as a transitioned woman. Do you think it matters in that instance?
I think her book was about transitioning.
Detransition Baby, it was.
Yeah, so that was her, and she identifies as a woman. Yeah. So there's no reason she shouldn't be in that prize.
Really?
Especially as that book is, obviously going to open our eyes into what her experience is like.
Do we even need sort of gendered, sort of literary competitions, really? Because, are we saying that sort of men and women can't compete against each other on who can write the best book? I think that's...
Well, the reason the Orange Prize began was because there were no women shortlisted on the Booker Prize for so long, and we were just... We began it. Kate Moss and I actually started a little group. We called it...
Just to be clear, that's not the supermodel.
No, she's the writer. We started the year there were no women on the Booker Prizes. We did the Hooker Prize, where we gave out our own prizes. I got a self-adhesive chest hair wig, for I think Martin Amis won that year for the most sexist book. We kind of sent it up, but then we actually started taking it seriously, and Kate Moss, not the supermodel, took it up to a higher level just to highlight women's rights.
Is it necessary now, though?
Yeah.
Well, we still know that all the research shows that books written by men are more regularly reviewed, they're better reviewed by their own friends, they get high representation in bookshops. We're still living in a patriarchy. So, yes, it still has to be addressed.
And then I would say that I predominantly read and buy books written by women, right? We all do that as well, and that's OK. We were talking
Men don't. Men don't buy books written by women.
They've also discovered that sort of...
Enid Blyton. I've read
Jane Austen.
hundreds.
Enid Blyton? When did you last sit down and read Famous Five, Johnny Gould?
Unfortunately, I don't read a lot of books now, which I know I should do.
This is another crucial thing. I think it's been found that there's been a big drop-off in the number of novels being sort of read by men. I think it's decreased by something like 25% over the last decade or so, which is in itself quite worrying, because you don't really want to end up in a sort of silo where novels are for women and, books about the Second World War are for men, right?
Yeah. So, because novels explain the world to you.
But William, your generation don't read papers. To us, the idea of not going out in the morning...
We're just inhaling... We inhale typescript,
Exactly. I don't want a Kindle, I want a paper. I want something that
I'm the same. I refuse to. I like buying newspapers, but I also refuse to have a Kindle.
But do you read books by women?
Yeah, I do.
Really? A couple of dead women. Oh, great. That's going well.
Coming up after the break, I'm going to be asking whose responsibility it is to look after your health. All that after the news.
It's just gone 11:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak will meet with leaders of the devolved nations and Irish Premier today for the first time since becoming Prime Minister. He's expected to urge the nations to work together and build a future defined by unity. Mr Sunak will meet his Irish counterpart, Michael Martin, and First Ministers Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford at the British-Irish Council Summit in Blackpool. The absence of a power-sharing executive means Northern Ireland won't be represented by any politicians at the talks. Mr Sunak will become the first Prime Minister to attend the summit in over a decade. President Joe Biden says it was a good day for democracy and America after voters cast their final ballots in the US midterm elections. The White House shared video of the president last night congratulating many Democrats who'd won hard-fought races. Control of the Senate still hangs in the balance, but Republicans look set to take the House of Representatives. The results, though, have defied expectations, with many experts predicting a red wave of Republican victories. The UK has frozen more than £18 billion worth of Russian assets since sanctions were imposed on the country after it invaded Ukraine. The Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation says that's over £6 billion more than those held against all other sanctioned regimes. They're the most severe sanctions Russia's ever faced, with more than 1,200 people and more than 120 businesses impacted. And ambulances in England, not including London, took over an hour on average to respond to emergencies last month. That's well above the NHS England target of 18 minutes, whilst response times for urgent calls averaged 3 hours, 34 minutes and 34 seconds. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Bev Turner today is back in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning. You are watching and listening to Bev Turner today on GB News. Now, who should look after your health? The government has tried numerous tactics, such as sugar taxes and calories on menus. We've got apps, we've got websites and TV shows devoted to getting us thinner and fitter. But we are still the third most obese nation in Europe. Now, there's even labels on food to show you how much exercise you'd have to burn off the product's calories. So this is a bit of a survey. So it was a very clever little bit of research. Okay, so there's a company that basically looked into if they put on chocolate bars, the amount of exercise you would need to do to burn off the calories. Would people eat less? So they had some canteens that had these on and they had some canteens that didn't. And guess what it showed? It made absolutely no flipping difference whatsoever as to whether somebody picked up a Mars bar or picked up an apple. Why, Johnny?
Did they know
Yeah, it's on the packaging saying like if you're going to have to walk up and down the steps for 25 minutes.
But if you haven't communicated that, by the way, if you have a quick look at the packaging, who picks up a piece of packaging? Well, actually, I'll tell you what, my son does. My son, who's really into his fitness, he looks at the nutritional value of absolutely everything.
Yeah,
and he's young; he can actually read it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's like
unlike us, absolutely. This one really annoys me, if I'm honest, because this just comes back to the whole nanny state. That people think that the government's responsible for everything. No, they're not. I totally believe that nutrition should be a part of the curriculum in schools. I think all kids should be taught to cook and cook healthily and the importance of it. 100%. But beyond that, it's an individual's responsibility, it's a parental responsibility to make sure that kids understand. The only other issue that this comes back to is selling off all the playing fields.
Yeah.
All kids should be doing exercise as a part of the curriculum. It shouldn't be a bonus, it shouldn't be an add-on, it shouldn't be, only private
It should be every day.
It should be every
Another
day.
thing we thank the Tories for.
Yeah. And I know not all kids like sport, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't get out and get some fresh air and go for a walk or whatever. You can provide for, activities for all kids that they do enjoy. You don't have to force all kids to play rugby because half of them don't want to and it's cold and it's wet and it's miserable. But the actual action of exercise should be instilled in our kids. And because our kids could go out in the streets 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, they ran off the calories. Because that's what a natural kid's instinct.
Do you know what, though? The messaging is very confusing, isn't it? Because we've now also got this body positivity movement, which is effectively normalising clinical obesity in adverts, and we're having to get school uniforms being made in much bigger sizes because so many kids are fatter than their parents. We've got children now, the first generation, that will die before their parents in terms of life expectancy because of the obesity. But the system is so stacked against us, Kathy. Every till you've got sweets and shops, every train station platform has a vending machine.
But we always did, Bev.
Oh, but it's worse now, isn't it?
Do you think so?
Oh, there's no doubt. The absolute saturation all around you of fattening and, let's face it, delicious calorific food.
But getting back to the body positivity, I think that's actually a good thing, because my generation, we grew up, skinniness was inniness. You had to be so thin all the time, and there were a lot of eating disorders with young women. And, I think, where are they keeping their internal organs? In their handbags? Because they're not in their bodies.
But there are still...
You could see the 3-course raisin they'd had for lunch,
But I believe that there should be a limit to that, Kathy, because when you're talking about obesity, you're talking about long-term health issues, which is just going to ratchet up the problems with the NHS.
I know, but in the days of, Rubens and Botticelli, to be a socialite, you needed cellulite. That was considered really
You were
sexy.
curvy, but you weren't
And who
obese.
doesn't want to comfort eat right now? And the world's so traumatic.
I think the problem with this is I agree with John on it's your individual responsibility to look after your health. The problem is that if we have decided as a country that obesity is a problem, the best way of dealing with that is through massive government action. That's the problem. That you could do something like they do in Japan, for example, where they ban access to particular forms of healthcare, or basically anything above emergency care if you're above a certain weight, which is why the Japanese are on average very thin and live a very long time, aside from the CMRSs. But also the point at which it's been calculated that we were the fittest in the entirety of our modern history was during the Second World War, basically, because people were working more, but more importantly, they had rationing. So if we want to live in a society where we don't have rationing, and we also want people to be relatively fit, it's coming back into education, right? It's making sure that people have access to be able to do sport, but also do home economics at school and learn how to produce a well-prepared meal. And I think it's a basic piece of sort of common sense, really, is that if kids are growing up reading sort of ready meals and they don't know how to sort of cook for themselves, and their parents aren't cooking sort of proper, healthy, balanced meals for them, then they're going to put on weight if they're eating lots of sugary stuff and they're not doing any exercise.
But what would do it then? So this experiment with the branding on this packaging to tell you how many... I mean, I don't like the calories on menus. Right? Have you been eating out recently? Where it says, steak and chips, 1,600 calories. I'm like, don't tell me that. I really, really want my steak and chips. I'm going to have it anyway, but you've just taken the edge off the pleasure of my evening.
But Bev, don't you make a decision. I'm going to allow myself to have that because I really want it, and I can see it's 1,600, but tomorrow I'm going for a run.
I do.
Tomorrow I'll
You're right, I
do
do
something
actually do
to
that.
accommodate.
Then you can have guilt-free gourmandising.
Is that what you like? Guilt-free gourmandising?
Yes, that's right. And it's also very good to go dancing after dinner. The disco diet is excellent.
Yeah, or
but
a walk.
Well, maybe if they just put pictures of Chris Hemsworth and George Clooney on the food, menu desire, then maybe that would be an incentive not to let yourself go.
It's carrot and stick, isn't it? I mean, I find it quite chilling what you were saying, William, about the fact that you shouldn't access health treatment if you're over a certain body mass index, whatever. Half of the country wouldn't be able to go and get treatment at the NHS. I mean, this problem has been growing and growing and growing, if you give the metaphor. For decades now, we have neglected it. What I find really interesting is how spineless, actually, governments have been doing anything about it, and yet they were able to tell us to stay in your house, go for a walk once a day. If they could be that muscular under the lockdown, why can't they then say to people, we mandate exercise?
Well,
your neighbours are going to dob you in if you haven't been for a run around the block today. Let's flip this round.
The only thing I run up are bills.
but that's the whole point we can take away from this sort of great clunking...
By the way, I'm not saying I want that. I'm just saying I'm raising the question.
That's what we can take away from the great sort of plunking fist health intervention that all of the lockdown policies were, is that if the central government decides that a particular outcome is necessary and it therefore has to take all actions possible in order to achieve it, then it can. Hence why I used the analogy of rationing during the Second World War. And I think, the case that has been raised about the fact that we have a publicly funded health service, and basically we're going to only have more and more pressure put onto that if people are living unhealthier lives, right? And so there's the case there for government intervention, which makes, I think, this country different to other countries with health services that are run on a more sort of private or sort of publicly contributed basis, is that if we are all expecting to pay taxes and then be able to use the service whenever we like, then we also have a responsibility to reduce the unnecessary pressures that we're putting on the NHS through our own lifestyles.
But then you're like, well, you were skiing, you broke your leg, we're not going to treat you. You smoked, you've got lung cancer, we're not going to treat you. Then you're...
And that's the problem, though. Yeah. But that's the problem, is that's the fundamental difference between having a sort of publicly sort of run health service like this and also this sort of libertarian mentality that it should be entirely your own responsibility for looking after your health.
What about the sugar tax, though? Boris Johnson turned that down. There should be a sugar tax, for sure. It's just bad for you as smoking.
I think they absolutely could put more pressure on the big businesses who are making enormous profits to do something. But what does that look like? Does that look like, Johnny, building a sports field? Does that look like the Coca-Cola sponsor? Do we want to go like America, where we have the sports stadiums in the local areas which are sponsored by various brands? Build me a new swimming pool, please.
Well, it's interesting because one of the biggest sponsors, say for sport, has been traditionally bookmakers. And because of all the issues with gambling now, suddenly we're all scared, and that's not an area we want to go. We don't want to be seen to be... And yet, you sort of think, but we're cutting our nose to spite our face.
Yeah.
Again, at the end of the day, if you've got any kind of addictive issue, then it's something you as an individual with your support case, whether that be your doctor, your family, your friends, need to address and ultimately take some personal responsibility. And that's the problem I have. I feel that we've moved into a world where there's so much a sense of entitlement, and entitlement goes way beyond just an entitlement to freedom of speech and basic democratic pillars. It goes into areas where I'm never responsible for my mess up. Take responsibility for your life.
It's hard, though, especially people, because we have an emotional relationship with food, Kathy, don't we?
Yes, of course. It is comfort eating. Yeah. Yes, but especially chocolate with a heartbreak. If you're breaking up with a guy, chocolate is penicillin. Nature's penicillin.
Is there a male equivalent, Kathy? Because I'm not sure there is. Because we get our hearts broken as well.
Yeah, I think the beer. Right. But you know what? Talking about dating, you know they have the labels on food. I think we should have labels on men. So when you are dating, if he has a label and it goes, you could just look it up and go, oh yes, he does clean up the bedroom, does wash up, good in bed. That would save so much time.
They suggest it to Tinder or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'd be more than happy to choose.
Yeah. What is his amuse-by date?
God knows what mine would say. I'm slightly terrified to find out.
The other thing that we have to also bear in mind is that we're talking about obesity and how people can appear to be unhealthy. There are also a lot of people, because of poverty in this country,
a poverty issue,
who are thin and unhealthy as well. And also there are a lot of people who are full and yet not fed a nutrition, or not eating a nutritious diet. Nutrition is at the bottom of it. Part of it, I think, Johnny, is this plate that the NHS still recommend, which is predominantly carbohydrate. And so there's a lot of thinking from the nutrition industry that actually we shouldn't be eating as much pasta and bread and potatoes. That shouldn't be half our plate.
I've only been on one diet in my life, And it was because, having hit a certain age, suddenly, having done so much sport all my life, I've always been very lucky, I've been naturally slim. But suddenly I was seeing things that were wobbling that never used to wobble. And I thought, right, I will go on a diet. And the diet, Bev, was totally down that route of cutting out all the carbohydrates. And it was just having raw meat. I wasn't allowed sauces on it.
Raw meat?
Well, not raw meat. But, not raw meat. But a lot of protein. Yeah, protein and vegetables and fruit. I could have, a few boiled eggs in the morning, etc. I couldn't believe it. I dropped almost a stone in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But it was the most uncomfortable 2 weeks of my life.
But also, there are a lot of dietitians who would concur that is the way we should be going more.
But if you're a mum and you've got two jobs, single parent, trying to look after your kids, you get home and just open a can of spaghetti or something. You totally understand that too. It is a poverty issue.
It is.
Food banks, and I mean, what you get. It's a lucky dip.
Yeah. People, it's very difficult. Ray has said, I'm a pensioner. We were talking about whether we are still a charitable nation in our hearts and whether the government should be funding basically various ventures and renewable energies overseas. That's the one that I found really problematic, and we haven't got any of our own. This week, Ray says, I'm a pensioner. I've been sending £100 a month to the Daily Mail Ukraine Fund since the war started. We cannot stop now until Putin is done with. My next payment is due on November the 21st when I get my government pension, and it will be paid. Joe says, what the hell is going on with this country? No one is calling out what's happening to our people. No money, bills through the roof, people going to freeze to death, and we're looking after everyone else. It makes me sick. And Andy says, no money should be sent overseas until all of our UK citizens are off the streets and nobody has to depend on food banks. Thank you for your messages.
Do you know what we haven't said, Bev, about being on the streets? Is that rewind back to the 80s and, unfortunately, the emptying of the mental homes and the mental issues, and we talked about it when we were talking about the police and how much police time is being utilised. I mean, I obviously, through my work as a host of charity auctions, I've met many people involved with homeless charities, and every single one I've ever asked, should I give money to somebody begging on the street, have said to me, never, don't you dare, never. Invest in the charity, invest in what we're doing, set up a direct debit and give them money to take people off the street, because ultimately, what will they do with that money? And they said, but if you feel the need that you want to do something, go and buy them some food or go and buy them a coat. Go and buy them something that you know will then be utilised.
It's so true, because actually the closing of residential care for people with mental and learning disabilities, I think we don't give enough attention to that. It just sort of happened and people were cared for in the community. And like you say, what we're seeing now is maybe we need to...
It's the long-term impact.
It's always short-term gain, that's right.
Right, OK. Now, a story that Kathy Lett was particularly keen to do. Prince Harry has many claims and titles, from the Duke of Sussex to Army Captain, but a new poll has just labelled him the sexiest ginger man alive. Harry received a hefty 19% of the votes, 5% more than second-place Ewan McGregor, and 10% more than Eddie Redmayne. Kathy, you are a big defender, a fan of ginger people, right?
I am. Oh, listen, I just had a funny story to tell about him. In the days when he was fun, so I was one of my friends was going to the Royal Polo and said, would I like to go along? And as a writer, you never turn down an adventure, you're always in Margaret Mead mode. So I was going to the polo, and Clarence House rang me up and said, we can see you're coming to the polo. Would you like to present the Royal Cups to the princes? Oh, there's a photo. And I was like, yeah, sure. They must have been very low on celebrities that day, like
that's Prince William there that you're cuddling up to.
Yes, and so I'm standing...
close there,
I'm standing at the podium, and I said to the organiser, who was one of those British upper caste guys who sends his shirts out to be stuffed, He was horrified they'd asked a lowly colonial female to give the cups. So I said, well, what do I do? And he said, well, as the princes approach, you kiss them on the cheek and present the cup. And I could see Prince William walking towards me, and he looked a little bit bored. So I said to him, apparently I have to kiss you. Do you want tongue? And Prince William went, oh, perhaps later. And he went back and told Harry, and I saw Harry killing himself laughing, and Harry came up and I said, do you want tongue? And he went, oh, yeah. So I gave him a big passion, and I jumped on him and rode him around the paddock, and he was so relieved not to be treated like a porcelain prince, but to actually have some fun. I mean, if ever they were going to put me in the tower, that would have been the moment. But I felt a bit of a frisson with him too. I was very annoyed when Meghan came along.
What do you think of him now as one of his former fans. Do you think he's lost his way a little bit?
I think he's lost his sense of irony. I think he's got having an irony deficiency. But I don't think we should blame... Everyone always blames the woman, you know, that trope of always blaming the evil woman. I think he's been through a lot of trauma. I mean, the reason he endeared himself to women particularly was when, as a young boy, walking behind the coffin of his mother. I mean, And then he was a rascal and he sowed whole plantations of wild oats. He was quite like a bit of a pirate. So we found him very charming. And he's obviously going through huge mental upheaval.
And he has got a great sense of humour. I mean, I'm saddened greatly by, you know, his sort of declining reputation. Because, I mean, I came across him about 3 or 4 times in the charity auction world. Yeah. And I was always told that if he bid, I wasn't allowed to reference him. So when his hand went up... Yeah, so when his hand went up, I went... ladies and gentlemen, the House of Windsor have entered the auction. That was my way round it. And he was really game. And there was one event that he went to where he was there in a private capacity. He took all his mates. He had his own table and took all his mates. And he'd said something while I was having my photograph taken before the event had even started. And I'd met him a couple of times. And he said something which was Mickey taking. And I not being the true professional, Kathy, I was looking at the camera having this really embarrassing photograph taken. And this person walked past with somebody else and said something slightly derogatory, taking the mick, obviously. So I naturally assumed it was a friend, so I flicked a V. And then when the bloke went, "That's it, great, John," I went, "Thanks very much." I thought, well, I'll see who it is, which of my mates. And I looked up, I was thinking, oh, my Lord, I can't believe it. I've just flicked a V at a member of the royal family. And that was Prince Harry? That was Prince Harry. And he bid in that auction that night, and he went all the way, and I was giving it all the lines of, you know, is there anybody out there, a Republican, maybe a distant relation of the Tolpuddle martyrs that wants to get stuck into the royal family? And by the end of the auction, the organiser, this wonderful woman and a great organiser called Nikki Turley, was in front of me at the stage going like this. Because apparently a royal protection officer was giving her the eyeball that I'd gone too far.
But I bet he didn't think that.
I know, he loved it. And I saw him afterwards, and his mates were all roaring with laughter.
I bet.
And also, you know, we're all saying, oh, no, he's talking too much about his mental health. But most English men, you have to do open-heart surgery to find out what's going on inside them. And the fact that he's making it OK for men to talk about their emotions.
Well, they both are.
And they both
William's
are.
been
And that's a really good thing.
Yeah. Are you a big fan of Prince Harry, William?
I must admit, I'm in a similar position of having gone off him in recent years. He used to be very entertaining. Yeah. Now, you know, not so much. And I think I've got various friends who work in sort of royal correspondency and the like, and they tell me rumours of what's in his book that's coming down the track, and they're rather eye-opening. So I would say that as fond as I am of the man that he used to be, I think the last few years he's only been doing damage to the royal family. And I think, unfortunately, one has to compare sort of Harry now with Harry then. But I think coming back to the original story of him being voted the sexiest ginger, I mean, I'm not sure there was a huge amount of competition.
Oh, I love ginger.
Well, was it all male? There were no females allowed in
all
this
male.
country.
So Ewan McGregor, I don't think of Ewan McGregor as being a famous ginger, do you?
Or Eddie Redmayne either, I think.
Eddie Redmayne, I guess he is sort of ginger, but...
Ed Sheeran?
Ed Sheeran.
Oh,
The other one I can think of.
I think they're all Celtic love gods. Gorgeous.
It's hard to look at Harry now, though, isn't it, and work out where he goes from here. With this book coming out next year, he's been kind of California-cated, hasn't he? That's part of the problem. Will he ever win back the hearts of the British people, do you think, Johnny?
I fear not. I mean, I'm with William. I was always very fond of him, and I had nothing but positive thoughts about him. And I'm sort of horrified what he's done. And I'm not going to make the mistake of blaming the woman, but they together. I think to throw your family under the bus in the manner which they've done, particularly when the family can't really respond, they've just got to keep a stiff upper lip, I think is unforgivable. You've got issues, that's fine. You go and discuss them behind closed doors. It's a family matter. But to do it in a public arena, I think is unforgivable.
Yeah.
And I really do fear that if that relationship doesn't succeed and he ends up coming back, you know, a divorced man, he won't have any friends left. I don't think the British public will particularly welcome him back, and whether we'll be able to ever rebuild his relationship with his brother, who was his best mate, and that is heartbreaking.
I agree.
Well, he's always got a tongue kiss from me.
And you know what? I think if he did get divorced, I think the British public would welcome him back, because we have blamed Meghan for his demise.
Well,
I think he would be seen to have been rescued himself, you know, from her clutches.
I think, and also, if you imagine sort of some alternate history where he hadn't married Meghan and he'd married the sort of girl that he'd gone out with previously, and he'd sort of shacked up with some Sloane Ranger or whatever, and he was still being the party prince and all the rest, and he hadn't gone off to California, I think he would be just as popular as he always was. And I think I think it's the sort of whole Lady Macbeth thing. I think it's the problem with Meghan. I think he is fully a willing participant. I think the media coverage, which blames it all on her, neglects the fact that he is, I think he had only about 2 A-levels, and one of those was like an E in art history. But nevertheless, the idea that he is a complete dupe and that she's just pulling all the strings is clearly wrong. And as I say, I think he's being incredibly damaging for the royal family. And that is a tragic shame, really.
Yeah, I would like to see him make friends with his brother, though, Johnny. I'm with you. I was really optimistic at the Queen's funeral that they might build that particular bridge, and then you saw the body language between the four of them looking at the flowers, and I just thought, no, that ship has sailed, hasn't it? That's it.
Well, William's made a decision, a very clear decision, that he has completely taken on board his role, his responsibilities as the future king. He has now got a much better relationship with his father. That's abundantly clear than perhaps he had before. And ultimately, therefore, that's required him to choose sides, and he's chosen.
Right, Johnny Gould, Kathy Lett and William Richardson, thank you so much for... I've got your surname wrong. Atkinson.
There we go. There was a sin there.
I've only met you for the first time, but there you go. Same as Cleaston. Right, we've come to the end of our show today, but I'll be back on Monday with another superb panel of guests talking about the subjects that matter to you. Coming up next is GB Newsday with Mark Longhurst. I'll see you on Monday.
I'm Alex Deacon with your latest weather update. It is very mild out there. It's also fairly blustery. Most of us having a dry day, but one or two exceptions, particularly northwest Scotland, where this weather front is still lingering. A very wet day across the far northwest. Low pressure up to the far north, and we're drawing in these southwesterly winds. Strong southwesterly winds, but they're bringing with them a lot of cloud, but also mild air. Now, there's some drizzly conditions for Wales and northwest England. The rain is heavy and persistent, though, across the far northwest and could cause some disruption here. Some brighter skies to the east, but generally it's just grey, windy and very mild. 14, 15, 16 degrees, perhaps 17 in one or two places. It's going to stay very mild overnight. That rain is going to persist across northwest Scotland. And as I said, could cause a bit of disruption. That rain will spread at times into Northern Ireland, perhaps southwest Scotland too. Still some drizzle around for parts of northwest England and Wales, staying very windy and gusty conditions, particularly for southeast Scotland and northeast England. And look at the temperatures. Overnight temperatures generally higher than the average maximum for this time of year. Another very mild and predominantly cloudy day on Friday. Still some drizzle at times over the hills of North Wales, northwest England. Still wet, you'll notice, across parts of western Scotland. And that rain becoming a bit more extensive across Northern Ireland during tomorrow afternoon. Look at these temperatures. If it brightens up, 16, 17, perhaps even 18 degrees Celsius. And another very mild night to come on Friday night and into Saturday. This line of rain will continue to edge southwards. That'll linger into the weekend across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, before pushing back further north and clearing away. Again, for most of England and Wales, the weekend it does look dry. Could be quite misty and murky, however, this weekend, because the winds will ease off a touch, and all the while staying very mild.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio.
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the story.